I loved Search for Reptar as a kid. One day recently, the feeling of nostalgia completely overwhelmed me, and I just had to get the game and play it again. I looked through eBay for a sale on the copy, and I found one that was listed much lesser than all of the others for some reason. There were pictures and the case seemed fine and everything. It didn't seem like it was damaged or non-functional. So I bought it, and some days later, it came in the mail. Upon opening it, I saw the disc, and rather than looking normal, it said Rugrats on it, and underneath it was some kind of date, possibly a build date. I felt a little ripped off. I didn't know what this could have possibly been. I was a bit afraid to put in my PS1, but I was going to test it anyway to see what it is. Maybe it was just a copy of a copy and it would function normally anyway. I wouldn't really care as long as I could play the game again normally. I put the game in and it started up. The title screen showed up, and it was just the regular Rugrats Search for Reptar title screen. It maybe seemed like there's less going on, but it still seemed fine regardless. I started a new game, and the intro played like normal, and I started out at the HUD. Everything was normal, everything looked normal, and all the music was normal. I then started my choice of the first level, Chucky's Glasses. The cutscene played like normal and the gameplay started. However, it was then where I then noticed some differences from what's usually there. First of all, there was a HUD in the corner. Not just any HUD, but it looked like a HUD that you would see in a Castlevania game, the more explorative search ones. And it had the HP and MP meters in the same style as that, but the aesthetic on it was more like what you would see in Rugrats with the colors in the bottle shape, almost like in the final game. It still played like normal anyways. I was a bit confused like this, but I trudged on. And Chucky went around and he was like, why can't I find my glasses? And I found one of the kids eventually, and we had to race back to the playpen as usual. Once the stairs came up, however, I wanted to do the trick where you save a lot of time and speed up by jumping down it. I tried this, and I flew right down as usual. However, upon landing, a realistic crack of bones crunching sound played, and Chucky went like, "Whoa!" and lost almost all of his health. I was able to run around like normal still, and it did spook and scare and surprise me, and I had to pause the rest, which just happened for a bit. I guess fall damage was a thing in this build, but I wasn't expecting it to be so surprising and graphic sounding. I went along as normal and found the rest of the kids, avoiding doing that skip which did slow and make things a bit more difficult, but I did it anyway. After that, I then started my next level, Egg Hunt. It once again started out normal. However, as you may remember, there's a timer to this level, and in this case, it gave a bit more stakes and context as to why there's a timer like that. As I was playing, I could hear Angelica remind me and say something about Chucky being tied to a bomb that was timed to go off if I didn't do it on time. And I panicked and tried looking for all of the eggs. And as I was doing this, I could overhear Chucky going like, help! And then Angelica going like, Chucky will die! And I was able to do it and beat the level on my first try. I didn't want to dare see what would happen if I failed. After that, I then went for Ice Cream Mountain. And the level, for the most part, was actually pretty normal, although I realized that after putting a few times and getting the golf ball in the hole, I would see urging to level up as if I gained enough experience doing things. The course where you play as Angelica and go through the secret pyramid came up, and of course I wanted to do that and explore and find the mummified Mr. Friend, that terrifying little buddy. Once I explored around and found him, however, I could hear really dramatic and over-the-top boss music start playing. It once again sounded more like something you would hear in Castlevania, and Mr. Friend hit Angelica, and she screamed, and blood came out of her. That was really realistic looking. And whenever Angelica hit, she would go like, "Ow!" And I was surprised by this and afraid of losing, so I ran for it and covered some distance to Mr. Friend. I sometimes would occasionally get a hit on him, and I was being super careful, and eventually I was able to defeat him, and I leveled up again. And I found, surprisingly, a weapon. It seemed to be a pretty rare one that's earned for hardcore players, because when I picked this up, I was able to press pause and go to equip screen, and there was a portrait of Angelica and stats and everything, and I equipped it, and it raised her attack by a ton. And I tried testing it out, and Angelica would swing this legendary golden black colored sword in front of her and go like, "Ha!" And after also moving around a little and pressing buttons, I accidentally did a code for a magic spell, and Angelica yelled, "Dark Metamorphosis!" and she glowed red. I continued on and finished that stage and got to the final golfing course. I was Tommy, and it looked how it usually does. However, this time, a giant adult human was there, and he was absolutely massive, like you would expect Reptar to be, and he was the announcer from the golfing games, and he used his lines that he does in the regular game of "You don't want that ice cream anyway," and while doing that, he was conjuring up powerful blasts from his hands and throwing them at Tommy, and once again, whenever I got hit, it did a significant amount of damage, and Tommy would go like, "Wah!" and blood would fly out of him, and I tried to beat the golfing course, and eventually I was able to, and it proved to be really difficult, but I was able to do it, and Stu was like, "Good job, kids, now you get all of the ice cream you want, because it's free." I then did the bonus game that pops up after you did enough levels of the cookie race, and I did it as normal where Angelica's chasing you and Tommy's running around and eating the cookies, and all the other kids were yelling at him to like, "Throw it here," while Tommy's like, and after I did it, the HUD changed a little bit, and there was this weird little goblin laugh that I heard, and Stu came home with more food for Tommy to consume and be gluttonous with, and he was like, "I got McDonald's," and he set a brown paper bag near the floor, and Mario, a tiny version of Mario, popped off the TV, and he went like, "Hee," and rubbed his hands together and went inside the bag, and he went like, and eating off it, and you could see the bag shaking around, and I approached it as Tommy, and then Mario got scared and flew out, and I was supposed to chase him, and I hit him a couple of times, but I couldn't defeat him on time, and I felt like a loser, and I wonder what that was all about, if he would ever come back, and what the reward could be for beating him. Anyway, after that, I looked for the next level, and I did Grandpa's Teeth, and once again, it was normal, but once I got to the part of the goose, I was expecting it at this point. The goose kept on hitting Tommy, and he would go like, "Oh!" and he would have blood fly out, and I couldn't fight back. I just had to run for it like in the normal game, and after a bit, I found Spike, and Once I got on Spike, the HP and MP meter somehow had increased much more, and if I pause, it was Spike's status on the portrait, and he had much higher stats than Tommy. Clearly, he was a very much more leveled and rare character to play as, and I went through the rest of the level like normal, and once I got to the part where you have to save Chucky from the goose and stuff, hockey pucks, Tommy was firing these big enchanted fiery arrows with the hockey pucks, and I eventually beat and defeated the goose. After that, I decided to do the space level, and it would make sense that Stu would put his baby boy to rest after this crazy day, and I did it, and it was mostly normal where you would play as Angelica. However, instead of just the laser gun from the remote, she would actually fire it off her hands, and the aliens would let out this horrifying screech whenever I hit them and killed them, and I leveled up a couple of times during this, and Angelica seemed very confident and cocky and would laugh evilly, like, ha 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 ha, as she was getting more powerful and killing off them. And I also was able to do a new spell where Angelica would yell, Soul Steal, and absorb all of the aliens' life force and replenish her own. I completed the level, and the next one I wanted to do was Incident on Aisle 7. The game warned me that this was particularly a really hard level, but I felt confident in it being able to do it anyways. After all, how different could it possibly be? I went through the level, and most of it was normal. However, when the part with Larry and Steve came up, they were these two giant titans, and the boss music from earlier played again, and they were all like, Larry and Steve, watch out for the lobsters, and they would throw donuts at Tommy, and he would get knocked back and go like, oh, whenever he got hit by them, but it didn't do quite as much damage as some of the previous enemies did, and after a bit, I was able to hit Larry enough, and I could tell that the boss defeat jingle played, and he was like, oh, forget you, man, and then they left, and an orb came up to fully replenish Tommy, and he leveled up. The next part of the stage then happened, and there were lobsters scattered everywhere, and they were pretty difficult to deal with. It took a lot of hits for them to go down, and when getting hit, they actually did a lot of damage to Tommy, and more blood would fly out, and clearly I was underleveled and unprepared for this stage, but I had to go on anyway. I barely managed to get over to the boss lobster, and I found some items and cookies and such in bottles to replenish Tommy's health with along the way. I then tried fighting the boss lobster, and I desperately tried hurting it and its minions, but my attacks would barely do anything, and I got near the boss lobster, and he did this attack where he grabbed Tommy and then threw and slammed him against the wall at full force, and it did so much damage, about half my health, and Tommy like, ugh! And it left a crack in the wall and rumble would fly out, and the other lobsters also came and started hitting me, and I tried beating them, but I couldn't do it, so I just desperately tried jumping over them and hitting the boss lobster and hoping it'd finish him off, but he did the same attack from before, and this time, when Tommy landed on the wall, he lost all of his health, and the game over thing played where, in the normal game, when you would lose all of your health, it would cut to this black screen with the baby crying, and it was like that, except this time a bunch of blood kept on flying off Tommy, and he was crying like, as this was happening, and he was floating in the midair, and it was like what would happen in a Castlevania game again, and it was so graphic, and I was surprised that they would allow this much blood in a kid's game, and it was so scary, and I felt bad for him, and I felt totally lost and disdained. After that, however, it got even more shocking as the screen fully faded to black, and then big red text came up saying, Tommy is dead. I felt devastated. My stomach dropped a bit when I saw this. It then, however, returned to the usual loading screen, and brought me back to the HUD. However, I wasn't playing as Tommy, I was playing as Chucky now, as if it just went to the next alive baby in line. Everything was still normal, however. The house looked the same and the music was the same. However, when I walked and looked outside, I could see that it was gray and cloudy and depressing out, probably because of Tommy's fate. And I went out in the backyard because I noticed another gray object there, and once I got to it, I could tell it was actually a tombstone, and it said Tommy on it. I approached it, and once I got there, I could hear thunder strike, and then Yoriyagami, that bastard, from the King of Fighters, I could overhear his laugh, and it started loudly playing over it as I looked at the tombstone, and I just turned the game off at this point. I couldn't take it anymore, and I didn't want to dare see what happened next, let alone what would happen if I ended up losing all of the babies. I don't care what was going on with Angelica or anything anymore. I don't know what happened, but I guess as it turns out, this was actually a copy of an earlier build of Search for Reptar, back when they had much more ambitious ideas, and also wanted to give the game a much more dark and edgy tone, just like the original intended end of Rugrats, as well as the evil Grandpa Lou character. I did some research to figure this out, but I don't want to play that game anymore. And I guess all that just goes to say is that whenever you go to buy a used game, be very careful. You don't want to know what happened with me, and you don't want to go through what I did. This also makes sense with the development cycle and why they had to cut and tone it down so much. Hence the "we did it for the children" thing.